Welcome to this, the final event of the Socratic Club this year. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Socratic Club, I'll open with just a brief history on the club. C.S. Lewis started the first Socratic Club at Oxford University in 1941 with the goal of providing an open forum for the discussion of the intellectual difficulties involved with religion and with Christianity in particular. About 4 years ago, a group of students started this club on the OSU campus. Tonight's debate, which is titled Intelligent Design versus Evolution, a debate on scientific assumptions in a free society, is part of a national formal collegiate debate series entitled Cicero's Podium, organized around the theme, what is the role of government in a free society? These debates aim to elevate and exemplify civil discussion, promote genuine intellectual diversity, and encourage and inspire active engagement with the books and the ideas that have shaped the American experiment in organized liberty. To learn more on this series, please visit www.isi.org. Intelligent design is the hypothesis that undirected evolutionary mechanisms are insufficient to account for the existence of certain organisms and biological processes. Proponents of intelligent design argue that the irreducible complexity of such systems confirms the action of a conscious designer to explain their existence. They look for evidence of what they term signs of intelligence, or physical properties of an object that they assert necessitates design. Intelligent design has been strongly opposed by the scientific establishment, while its place in science classrooms as an alternative to the teaching of evolution has been hotly contested. Two leading experts presenting widely divergent points of view on this issue will explore the scientific and philosophical merit of intelligent design and evolution. Our speakers for tonight are Dr. Cornelius Hunter and Dr. Michael Ruse. Dr. Hunter will argue that design offers a better explanation for what we observe in nature than the mechanisms of natural selection. Dr. Michael Ruse will argue that naturalistic evolution provides a fully convincing explanation. The format for tonight is slightly different from our typical debate formats. Each speaker will be allowed 20 minutes to make his presentation. Then we'll follow with a rebuttal. For one speaker, we'll follow with a rebuttal with the second speaker. They will each ask each other a question, each a response. And then we will engage in audience questions for the remaining of the time, which will be, say, until 9 something or whenever we get tired, or whenever I cut it off. So, before we start, I would like to ask that you not pass around flyers that are not affiliated with the Socratic Club or with ISI. There's been some problems with that in the past, so please refrain from doing so. And if someone hands you one, give them a mean face. So the first speaker for tonight is Dr. Cornelius Hunter. Dr. Hunter earned his PhD in biophysics from the University of Illinois. He is adjunct professor at Biola University and the author of the award-winning Darwin's Guide, Evolution and the Problem of Evil, as well as Darwin's Proof, The Triumph of Religion Over Science. His most recent book is forthcoming in 2006, Science's Blind Spot. Dr. Hunter's research interests include optimal estimation and control of nonlinear systems, and molecular biophysics. His interest in the theory of evolution involves both the scientific, historical, and theological aspects of the theory. Dr. Hunter?
Thank you, Seth, for that introduction. I would like to thank the organizers of this debate, and I would like to thank Dr. Ruse for being here tonight. I look forward to a meaningful exchange of ideas. I would like to begin by discussing what is going on in the life sciences. There are significant problems with evolution, problems which are not merely details, but rather are fundamental to the theory. Here are a few examples. Darwin's theory was based on the fact that biological variation naturally occurs in populations. It is this biological variation that Darwin said natural selection acts upon. But from where does this biological variation come? You can imagine back in Darwin's day, people imagining some sort of simple perturbing force acting on each individual in the population. What we now know today, however, is that there is a complicated molecular machine or molecular system that produces this biological variation. This variation machine is a key part of the adaptation ability that populations have. What science is now telling us is that biological variation and adaptation, which Darwin relied upon for his theory, ironically do not themselves fit into his theory. In fact, not only do they not fit into his theory, we are now finding that mutations which contribute to biological variation are actually correlated with the environment. There is still much to learn about how organisms and populations interact with the environment, but what is being discovered is a fascinating and complicated adaptation machine. Much of our knowledge here deals with bacteria since they are easier to study, and it is clear that both their mutation rate and location are somehow correlated with the environment. It appears that adaptation pathways are to some extent pre-programmed. So this is very curious. We must believe that evolution somehow created this phenomenally complex machine so that evolution could take place. One reason evolutionists believe this adaptation machine must have somehow evolved is because there's so much commonality across all the species. By the way, this means that the adaptation machine had to have been first on the scene. Billions of years ago, life did not start out simple. High complexity came first right off the bat, but because there is so much commonality across all the species, this for evolutionists is evidence for common descent. In fact, evolutionists have heavily touted the fact that the fundamental molecular processes within the cell are universal across all the species. But here we run into another problem. We now know that the replication process of the DNA molecule common to all cellular life most likely could not have arisen from a common ancestor, because the machinery is too different, even though the process is the same. Now there is another problem. Even if we were to believe that somehow the adaptation machine could have evolved, we now know that the kinds of change it brings about does not seem to be up to the challenge. It does not create the large-scale changes required by evolution, such as changing the overall body plan. Even many evolutionists have given up on this idea and instead think that macroevolution must be caused by some other, heretofore unknown, mechanism. Macroevolution, as one evolutionist put it, is more than repeated rounds of microevolution. So science is showing us two problems: the creation of the adaptation system and the limitations of that system, even if it could have evolved. Now another problem is that we now know that organisms resist genetic change. Obviously, if evolution created the bald eagle, jellyfish, cheetah, pine tree, and every other single species on Earth, then species must be able to incorporate genetic changes readily. But instead, what we find is resistance to such change. In fact, there is a term for this: genetic homeostasis. We now know that organisms tend to resist genetic change. Recently, a good example of genetic homeostasis was found in a well-studied plant called Arabidopsis. In this study, plants were found to be able to fix a crippled gene. What was surprising was that the gene had been crippled in both parents of the plant. In fact, evolutionists thought that there was something wrong with the experiment. For them, it was strange and unexpected, because the offspring were able to fix the gene in spite of not having inherited a correct version from either parent. How did the plant know what modifications to make? Somehow the plant design has this information and is able to fix the broken gene. Species have a remarkable ability to resist change and preserve their design. Now another problem is that similar designs in different species that are supposed to have been inherited via common descent do not share similar genes or embryonic development pathways. Textbooks have used this as a key evidence for evolution, but in fact this evidence is against evolution. It is typical for similarities that are supposed to be a product of common descent to derive from different genes and different embryonic development pathways. It is a fascinating example of how rich biology is. Nature shows us so many different ways of doing things. Another problem with evolution is that similar species have significant genetic differences, known as orphans. When this was first discovered, the response of evolutionists was to say, Well, this will iron itself out and go away after we determine a few more genomes. But it hasn't. The more genomes we read off, the more of these differences that we find. At the other end of the spectrum, more distant species have incredible similarities in their genomes. Evolutionists were dumbfounded when identical segments were discovered in distant species. And these are not short little segments. Vast stretches of identical DNA have been discovered, and they show no sign of critical function. In fact, all kinds of studies have been done on mice where these stretches of DNA were knocked out, and no tangible effect on mice was found. In fact, in general, the species show all kinds of patterns that do not fit with evolution. One problem is that the three fundamental categories of life, which all species fall into, do not easily map into a single common ancestor. Instead, as one researcher put it, phylogenetic incongruities can be seen everywhere in the universal tree, from its roots to the major branchings within and among the various taxa to the makeup of the primary groupings themselves. The reconciliation of the molecular and the visible morphological features has been a major problem in trying to resolve the evolutionary tree. The molecular and morphological features often indicate, quote, strikingly different, quote, evolutionary trees that cannot be explained as due to different methods being used. The growing gap between molecular analyses and the fossil record, concluded one evolutionist, is astounding. And often what evolutionists must conclude is downright strange. Over time, insects must have evolved wings, then lost them in the evolutionary process, only then later to evolve them again. Or again, bats must have independently evolved in separate lineages, the same intricate echolocation capability. Incongruities are found everywhere in the evolutionary tree, and some researchers are calling for a relaxation from tree thinking. Thinking in terms of evolutionary trees is not helping the research. There are many more examples like these that I do not have time to go into, but these give you a sense of what science is indicating. Several fundamental tenets of evolution have not fared well. Let me give you one more example, complexity. What nature is revealing to us is one phenomenally complex system after another. For example, right now, a frenzy of activity involving millions of molecules is taking place as the light entering your eye triggers a complex sequence of actions, ultimately causing a signal to be sent to your brain. Even a mere single photon can be detected in your vision system. It all starts with this photon interacting with 11-cis retinal, a light-sensitive chromophore molecule. This interaction causes the chromophore to change configuration, and this in turn influences the large transmembrane rhodopsin protein to which the chromophore is attached. In response to the chromophore photoisomerization, rhodopsin causes the activation of hundreds of transducin molecules. These in turn cause the activation of cGMP phosphodiesterase, an enzyme that degrades the cyclic nucleotide cGMP. A single photon can result in the degradation of hundreds of thousands of cGMP molecules. cGMP molecules serve to open non-selective ion channels in the membrane, so reduction in cGMP concentration serves to close those channels. This means that millions of sodium ions per second are shut out of the cell, causing a voltage change across the membrane. This hyperpolarization of the cell membrane causes a reduction in the release of a neurotransmitter, the chemical that interacts with the nearby nerve cell in the synaptic region of the cell. This reduction in neurotransmitter release ultimately causes an action potential to arise in a nerve cell. Of course, there's a wealth of yet more detail which makes the information conversion process more complicated than I've described. Now, the response of evolutionists to all these different problems is to say that evolution is a fact, and that there is no evidence against it. That's right, all evidence, they say, supports evolution. And it is not a theory, but rather a fact. I could talk all night here about problems with evolution, and it wouldn't make any difference. Now, this may seem strange, but you need to understand the evolutionary perspective. Evolutionists are not naive about these problems. They're not illogical. They're not misguided. Their arguments make perfect sense when you understand their perspective. There are very powerful metaphysical and theological arguments for evolution. That is why evolution is a fact. These theological arguments long predate Darwin. They were prevalent in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. They were promoted by well-known figures such as Kant, Hume, and Leibniz, and they were popular with many lesser-known thinkers. I'll skip the long history of these ideas and fast forward to the writings of Darwin, where these ideas are crucial and show up in abundance. Darwin wrote that the clustering of the species is, quote, utterly inexplicable if species are independent creations. Likewise, he believed that the similarity of marine animals in distant seas around the northern hemisphere was, quote, inexplicable on the theory of creation. Or again, deep limestone caverns on different continents presented nearly identical conditions, yet harbored dissimilar species, and this, according to Darwin, was a problem for creation. Also, native plants and animals were often overtaken by those introduced by man. For Darwin, this meant they were not designed. The lack of frogs on oceanic islands was very difficult to explain on the theory of creation. Unique species of bats